Hello there guys, what is going on? Son of Chelsea back here again for another episode of Added Time, answering your questions that you kindly submitted. Thank you guys for all the questions you did submit. Apologies that I can't get to all of them in today's video. It's got some interesting topics to talk about today. But before we do get into those questions, I want to ask you guys, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also hit that like button if you're enjoying the content because it helps out the channel as well. But let's get into your questions. Firstly here from Roy, who asks, if Ross Barkley leaves, which could happen, who should get the number 8 shirt? For me, the first name that pops up into my mind is Mason Mount. I think marketing wise, it'd be a massive thing for Chelsea. I think they'd love to do it. Just the narrative of Frank Lampard being the head coach, wearing the number 8 shirt for Chelsea, and now Mason Mount getting that number 8 shirt, a goal scoring midfielder. I think symbolically he's been so massive for Frank Lampard this season, showing the best assets of Chelsea's attacking play, and I think Mason Mount represents a lot of what Frank Lampard wants to instill at Chelsea within his side. So I think it'd be a brilliant marketing move by Chelsea. Potentially Kai Havertz, if he was to come into the club, that could be a number that was given to him if Ross Barkley leaves, but I just think Mason Mount is the first name that comes to mind. And of course it has to have happened that Ross Barkley leaves Chelsea, which I think he could this summer, but yeah, Mason Mount is the first name that I think of when you ask that question. Fifi asked, Daniel, due to Kovacic's recent poor performances and his inability to show up in big games, do you have any different thoughts about who should be given the Player of the Season award? Maybe Pulisic, Mount, Willian or Tammy? Personally, for me, I would rate his overall season at a 6.5 out of 10. I think that's really harsh. I think Kovacic has been one of Chelsea's best performers. I think he would deserve Player of the Season. I don't think anyone could argue with that if he was to be given Player of the Season. I think Bayern, yeah, he was poor, but that's an outlier in his season. Performance-wise, he's been brilliant mostly for Chelsea this season. He's probably been our most consistent performer from August to August, this very long season, of course, with that break due to the pandemic. But I think that, you know, what Kovacic brings to the team, I think is very important, and I don't think people are fooled by Kovacic. I don't think it's just a case that, oh, you know, he can do nice skills and, you know, he's nice on the ball. I think it's actually effectively what he does. And you talk about big games. Kovacic has showed up in a lot of big games for Chelsea this year. Recently, against Wolves, he was outstanding, which helped us get Champions League football on a final day. A massive pressure game for Chelsea, and he stepped up there when we didn't have N'Golo Kante, when we just came off the back of a poor defeat to Liverpool. The Man United semi-final, I thought he was brilliant that day. I don't think he was good against Arsenal, unfortunately getting that red card in that game. I think back to big games earlier in the season, especially the 2 wins against Spurs, where we were coming off the back of a bad defeat, and Kovacic in both of those games very much excelled for Frank Lampard. I think the fact, you know, you compare Kovacic under Sarri to under Lampard, you've seen a transformation there of the player, of how much he's very much improved and looks much more dynamic under Lampard, pretty much from the word go back in pre-season. The names you mentioned I think are fair. I mean, Christian Pulisic has been outstanding, especially in the back end of the season. Mason Mount, I think for me, other than Kovacic, is the likely candidate for Player of the Season. Willian has had a brilliant season for Frank Lampard as well. I think consistency-wise, he's been good. And maybe Azpilicueta. The only thing with Tammy Abraham, who a big fan of Tammy, I think he's had a brilliant season based on pre-season expectations. But just the fact he was the main striker for the first part of the season, and for the second part of the season, due to injury and form, Giroud took over there. So I think maybe that could rule him out. But he did get 18 goals in the end. So I think all those players are fair. But for me, Kovacic, I think definitely deserves more credit than that. Brendan asked, do you think after Sarri got sacked, Jorginho is likely to stay now? Maybe. It depends on what Pirlo wants to do at Juventus, because Juventus definitely felt for a long time like the only sort of likely suitor for Jorginho this summer. They were the only club willing to spend that amount of money for Jorginho. I think I've said this on the channel before, and people's reports in the media have talked about this before, that Chelsea are likely to demand a high fee for Jorginho. They're not going to let him go on the cheap. 50 to 60 million, I think, is what you can expect a fee for Jorginho, likely if he was to leave Chelsea. But if Pirlo wants to change the system and change the style, a bit like Frank Lampard this year, would Jorginho suit Pirlo's style? We really don't know Pirlo. You know, this is a massive job for him. So I think it depends there. If he does want to sort of have a similar type of style to Sarri, a 4-3-3 with a deep lying player there, like a Regista type player, which wouldn't be too surprising given Pirlo's career, maybe Jorginho could still fit. And would Juve really pay that money for Jorginho? But with Sarri gone, Jorginho may stay. I think Chelsea, if they don't get the money, won't be selling him in the summer. I think that's pretty simple. So I think we're just gonna have to wait now. I think it has definitely put that move in doubt now, but I think it's just waiting now to see if there's another club or Juve would still come in for Jorginho in the future. Harris asked, what if Jorginho leaves and N'Golo Kante is not fulfilling the role of CDM? If so, means I would like to see Ethan Ampadu and Billy Gilmore partially fighting for that role of CDM or DM. What's your take on it? Of course, following on from that Jorginho question, if he was to leave, I think Ethan Ampadu, we heard rumours last night that he could be going to Norwich on loan. It doesn't look likely. It looks more likely that Ampadu is going to be going on a Premier League loan to somewhere. Maybe Fulham potentially could be a good move for him. I'm a bit surprised by that. I'm a bit surprised that Lampard isn't going to look at Ampadu. I know it's going to be a very short pre-season, condensed pre-season, so it's difficult to maybe have the same sort of patience or look at players in depth as you could maybe in a normal circumstance. You know, Frank Lampard very much has to focus on next season now because it's right around the corner for Chelsea. But I would have liked to have seen him given a chance. I think he could have done a job there, especially in a rotational sense. Billy Gilmore, of course, is injured till about October time, so he won't be going out on loan, especially next season. Maybe if we have a mid-season transfer window, he could go out on loan there for more minutes, but I can't see that happening. I think it really depends on Declan Rice. I think if Chelsea sign Declan Rice, I think potentially Lampard will look at that and go, okay, we've got cover for CDM in Declan Rice if he was to play a centre-back. If we don't get Declan Rice and we get another centre-back, then potentially we do need to think about who could fill in for N'Golo Kante, because if his injury issues persist, it's going to be a problem for Frank Lampard. It really is. I mean, if you keep Jorginho, then the argument is, you still got a player there in sort of a squad sense to fill in, but as we've seen this season, Jorginho, in the way Frank Lampard wants to play, just doesn't really fit in that role. So I think it's a challenge, it's a question for Frank Lampard, but the problem is as well is that you think of priority-wise, Chelsea need a centre-back, a left-back and a goalkeeper, and I think CDM is one of those roles where I think, of course, it's majorly important, but, doing all of those deals in one summer, I think at one point, one of those deals is going to fall through, or one of those positions is going to be left maybe for the next transfer window, and I think CDM would be the one to be left. I think it just depends on what Chelsea do. Ampadu could still stay at Chelsea, we're not entirely sure yet, so I think he'd be a good player for rotation to give minutes if N'Golo Kante's fitness problems persist, in my opinion. Jefferson here says, thanks, you made the season more insightful for me. Thank you, mate, for saying that. He then asks, do you think with what he showed during the Bayern game, Callum Hudson-Odoi can go on to have a blistering season that we all want him to have? Absolutely. I think this is a massive time for Callum Hudson-Odoi now. With Willian and Pedro both gone now, there's a spot there, and if Chelsea don't recruit in that area again, there's going to be more chances for Callum Hudson-Odoi to break through and get minutes under Frank Lampard. I think it's about improving himself, it's about being consistent. Yes, he's a young player, and it's about utilising that talent that clearly is there. You saw it again on Saturday. There's that moment of inspiration for Callum Hudson-Odoi that we saw under Sarri in brief spells, that we saw a little bit during the season. I think when he came back from injury, the unfortunate thing was he got re-injured again, which I think halted his progress. But I think definitely, the amount of games Chelsea are going to be playing next year, it's going to be so congested. I think there's going to be a lot of rotation next season at Frank Lampard, like all managers are going to have to do quite frequently, more frequently than usual. And also it's about end product, competing with Hakim Ziyech, competing with Christian Pulisic. Can he match their end product? Because if he does, I think Frank Lampard will be giving him more opportunities next season. So it's in Callum Hudson-Odoi's hands to prove to Frank Lampard he can be a first team regular again next season. Hritwik asks, Benrahma needed or not, considering both Werner and Havertz can play on the wing, or do you think we still need a conventional winger? This is a good question, and it does follow on from the Callum Hudson-Odoi question that I just answered. I think that a bit like CDM, I don't think a wide position. I think it would be one of those things where if Chelsea get all their business done, get a left back, get a centre back, get a goalkeeper, and maybe there could be an opportunity to bring in a Benrahma, then maybe you bring him in. I mean, Benrahma is not, even one of the top 3 choices now for recruitment. Chelsea need to go out and fix the other end of the pitch. I think the fact that, as I've stressed continuously, the players that Frank Lampard has brought in and the players he's got currently in the squad, they're versatile, they're flexible, they can play in a variety of positions. Yes, I think there'll be a lot of those players like Ziyech and Werner that probably will nail down positions consistently, but with Christian Pulisic getting that injury, maybe you could see the season starting with Timo Werner on the left potentially, and Giroud Fontami up front, and then Ziyech on the right potentially. Havertz, we know can play in a variety of positions as well. And maybe Lampard and the club will both look at the situation in a similar way and say, we've got a number of players here as well. Mason Mount, we've seen Lampard play out wide as an inverted winger in a 3-4-3 before, so I think we've got enough there if we don't go out and sign Benrahma. I think Benrahma, interesting, exciting player, but definitely not a priority signing for Chelsea anymore for me. I think it has to be all on defence now for Chelsea. They need to fix that before we start next season. And lastly, Callum Jack asks, out of all the Cobham kids, who do you think has the highest potential? For me, it's Reece. I think I agree with you. I think Reece James definitely can be nailing that right back spot down next year, especially if we consistently play with a back four, which I think Frank Lampard wants to. I think he could definitely be a big player. I think where the game is going, we've seen this with Trent Alexander-Arnold at Liverpool, fullback players becoming so important in terms of creativity. I think Reece James, his delivery. I mean, if Chelsea can master getting on the end of Reece James crosses next year and we improve in that area, I think Reece James could have an amazing season creatively. I think he could be one of Chelsea's best creators next year on that right side. I think, of course, he needs to improve defensively, and that will grow over time. He's still a very young player. Other than him, I think, Mason Mount, I think his versatility to play in a number of positions, I think helps him because I think he'll get more minutes under Frank Lampard. Frank Lampard clearly trusts Mason Mount. Tammy, if he can consistently score even more goals than he has this year, he's a very valuable player. I mean, if you can keep players who, can get you 20 goals a season, I think the problem is with Timo Werner coming in, if he becomes Chelsea's main striker, how long will Tammy stay at the club? I think Tammy will see a big future for himself, and I think a number of clubs want to take him away from Chelsea. Callum Hudson-Odoi as well. There's a number of players there. It's so difficult to predict. Not all of them are going to make it. That's just the reality of the situation at a top club like Chelsea, and just based on, how footballers work, not all of them are going to make it. Some are going to fall away. Some are going to have to move on to other clubs to get minutes. Some may have consistent injury issues, which stops their career from progressing. I mean, all of these factors have to come into play for them to have perfect careers at Chelsea. But I do agree with you. I think Reece James is probably the best shout, and just behind that, I'd say Mason Mount based on what I've seen this season. So that is it for this episode of Added Time. Thank you guys so much for submitting your questions for today's video. If you did enjoy today's video, hit that subscribe button and a notification bell so you never miss an upload. Follow me on Twitter @SonofChelsea. Have a great day, and I'll see you again.